Mexico is the second most populous country in Latin America after Brazil, and the home to nearly 130 million people. Together with drug cartels, corruption is one of the major issues. Transparency International ranks Mexico as 135 out of 180 countries on the Corruption Perception Index of 2017. The country has a high level of perceived corruption in the public sector, scoring a 29 out of 100. This is making Mexico as corrupt as Russia and Honduras. Mexico is also Latin America's second largest economy.
Although Mexico's current president ran on an anti-corruption platform, he has been embroiled in numerous corruption scandals since he took office. Most recently, in July 2015, he was accused of giving his unqualified niece a high-paying position within the state-owned oil company. Besides affecting the public sector, corruption is rampant in private enterprise as well.
The scandal known as La Casa Blanca revolves around President Enrique Peña Nieto, a man who ran on an anti-corruption platform. The name comes from the color of the mansion that Peña Nieto and his family have received in turn for awarding lucrative contracts to a construction company called Grupo IGA. The most recent contract was to build a high-speed railway and was worth $3.7 billion. The CEO of the company is a personal friend of the president. Between 2005 and 2011, when the incumbent president was the governor of Mexico State, the company received contracts worth $652 million. The president has stated that his wife, former telenovela actress Alicia Rivera, was in the process of buying the house before the alleged agreement would have taken place. However, critics are not content and point to the fact that the house belongs to a company that has received favorable benefits from the government in the past.
Perceived unfairness is one possible explanation as to why the Casa Blanca scandal happened. Mexico is already perceived as one of the most unequal states in Latin America, and in the last 5 years, the perception that the government rules in favor of powerful interests has increased from 75 to 78%, above the regional average of 67%. This means the populace as a whole expects the government to hand out contracts to those in power, allowing for an easy means of corruption.
Mexico is taking great strides in the transparency of the public sector and is the second possible explanation for the corruption scandal. Not only is the government becoming more open about what the government is doing, but also where the government is spending money. With this information, journalists, businesses, citizens, judges, and prosecutors are more inclined to exert greater control over public officials and demand accountability for the decisions made by politicians.
Mexicans are consuming less news than Latin America. Moreover, in the last 6 years, Mexican consumption of news through television, radio, and print sources have dropped considerably below the regional average, and consumption of internet sources have only increased by 1% compared to 6% for the region as a whole. Corruption, like in the Casa Blanca scandal, can be made easier when citizens are not paying attention to and don't trust the media.
Although expansion of the middle sector is typically one of the catalysts for a country to fight corruption, Mexico does not follow this pattern. The country has a smaller middle class, and Mexico has experienced less growth of the middle class than the rest of Latin America. With this in mind, one could argue that the interests of the president are more closely tied to the country's elites.
Economic downturn is not a cause of corruption in Mexico. Mexico is one of 6 nations in Latin America that has experienced positive growth in GDP over the last 10 years, and Mexico's GDP at 2% is higher than the regional average of 1.2%. Mexico's economy is growing steadily, meaning there are economic opportunities other than corruption in which people can make money. Wealth distribution is still a possible cause of corruption in Mexico. The Gini coefficient measures wealth distribution in countries. Mexico ranks as the 6th most unequal country in Latin America.
In the most recent Mexican presidential elections, we are able to see the short-run implications that have impacted the political sector. Riding a wave of populist anger that was fueled by the corruption, the leftist Andrés Manuel López Obrador, also known as AMLO, was elected president of Mexico.
Who is AMLO?
There was a time when AMLO was a member of the PRI party. That was in the 1970s. But this institutional revolutionary party was already more institutional than revolutionary then. That's why AMLO left them and created a party of his own, the Democratic Revolutionary Party, the stronghold of the true Mexican left. But as you can imagine, defeating the PRI was mission impossible until the year 2000. That year brought the big crash of the biggest Mexican party. For one, they lost the presidency to the conservatives, and for another, they lost the mayor of the city of Mexico to AMLO.
Given the Vanderbilt report, there is still hope for political institutions in Latin America, despite the growing popularity of populist candidates in recent elections. such as those in Mexico and Brazil. However, this theme of populism that has seen Bolsonaro and AMLO get elected follows a trend in Latin America of populists getting elected after trust in institutions has been shaken. For example, Morales in Bolivia and Chavez in Venezuela.